people talk about species needing to move to more suitable habitat in response to climate change. But this is often in the abstract. What does this mean on a practical level? Plants, for instance, can't move on their own, and they require animals, wind, or water in order to reproduce and disperse. And this brings me to my study system, the North American temperate rainforest. Temperate rainforests grow in coastal regions throughout the world. What makes our North American rainforest a little funky is that we have an inland rainforest as well. Both of these regions are separated by about 200 kilometers of very dry terrain, and over 100 plant species have separate populations in both regions. So these plants had to get to these regions somehow, and we have two main hypotheses on how this occurred. First is that originally the two rainforests were connected, but beginning about 2 million years ago, the Cascades rose up and created a rain shadow that dried out the basin in between the two regions. The second is that all of our plant species in the interior are the result of long-distance dispersal events from the coast to the inland beginning about 12,000 years ago after the last ice age. We can test these hypotheses with genetic methods, and previous research has yielded support for both hypotheses depending on the species. But these studies were on overstory trees that are both wind-pollinated and wind-dispersed. What about something a little more complex? And this brings in my study species, skunk cabbage, devil's club, and western wild ginger. All three were important to First Nations, primarily for medicine, and they all have different dispersal and pollination strategies. Skunk cabbage is pollinated by beetles and dispersed by water. Devil's club is pollinated by flies, and its red fruits are dispersed by bears. And wild ginger pollinates itself, and its seeds are dispersed by ants. So I sampled all of these species throughout their entire range, and what I found after extracting their DNA from dried tissue is that most of their migration routes are completely unexpected given our prior hypotheses. And why is this important? Well, I argue it's going to be very difficult for us to predict how and where these plants will move in the future. A lot of factors were necessary for these things to get around in the past, and the loss of any pollinator or disperser could mean their extinction. If we scale these results up to a global scale, just think about all the interactions necessary for plants to move around in the face of climate change. I argue, therefore, if we want to ensure the continued existence of these three rainforest species and global plant populations, which are our primary sources of food and medicine, we need to preserve our present biodiversity better than we currently are so we can preserve these interactions. Thank you.